delighted to welcome our next guest, Sarah Cotman, or rather Warrant Officer Sarah Cotman, I should say, from the Royal Air Force. Sarah is an inclusion champion for the Royal Air Force and is also responsible when it comes to advising the senior leadership team when it comes to matters on behaviour, diversity, inclusion, and also representation. She's a judge for the Women in Defence Awards and was the deputy chair of the RAF LGBTQ+ network for many, many years. Diversity and inclusion and belonging in the Royal Air Force have been going for now a number of years, and 20 years of kind of continual change for the better. And so this session is going to cover how far the Royal Air Force have actually come within the context of the wider MOD, and also looking at literally from those early days of kind of legal barring of LGBTQ plus people serving in the armed forces, now to many roles of kind of female personnel, which I think is absolutely fantastic. You know, now the organisation is very inclusive, you know, very kind of open and really kind of truly trying to get the very best talent to serve our country from up and down the nation. So thanks very much indeed for joining us, Sarah, and welcome.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's an exciting thing to be part of this. So yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, I wanted to introduce you to 17-year-old Sarah. So I'd like to say that I look exactly the same, but I think we'd all be kidding ourselves, wouldn't we? So this is 17-year-old Sarah. This is me graduating very early on. And essentially, the point there is 17-year-old Sarah was actually serving illegally at that stage, so the law hadn't changed, and it was still illegal for LGBT plus people to serve in defence. Why did I put myself through that? Well, simply because I wanted to be an RAF nurse, and that was my priority at the time. So yeah, I joined up. In all fairness, was 17-year-old Sarah really aware of what that meant and the implications? Probably not. I was not particularly worldly wise and not thinking about that. That was my end goal, and that's what I was interested in. So yeah, so that's for comparison. So by comparison, the young lady on the right of that photo is LAC Georgie Sandover, and she graduated earlier on this year as the first female in the Air Force to get through dismounted close quarter combat training. So that's our first female to get through the training and be employed since we've changed all the rules on women being able to serve in all our frontline command roles. So there's 20 years-ish apart between us there, but I wanted to show you that as a start and end game and where I've sat in it all from before we even start. Okay, so whenever I'm talking about some of these things, I try and use this as a model. Now, I've stolen this for many times, so it's not my work, but I really like it as a way just to sort of shape a conversation, but try and explain what I'm saying. So, and the way I talk about it is, if diversity is what we have, well, that's great if you can control that. And if you're in a business that can control who you employ and who steps through your front door, brilliant. We're not always in that space in defence because we're not attractive to everyone, understandably so. We do need to do some work around that, and I'll talk about what we've done about that as we go through. But we can do things about the inclusion piece and then ultimately that belonging. Now, everyone thinks the military is one big family, and that's it to a certain degree. But there are things we can do differently in order to really grow that culture of belonging. And I tend to use this as my sort of conversation piece, certainly with our leadership team, about what they can do to influence this triad, because some things we can control and some things we can't. I think that's an important recognition, actually. Diversity is what we have. Okay, well, first of all, the question is that true? And I'm going to I'll talk around the photo first. So down on the right, obviously you can work out, hopefully I'm there on the flanking the right of that photo. In the middle of that is a lady called Kaz Page. Kaz Page was the first person in defence to transition in terms of gender, and that's over 20 years ago. The importance of that is that's before it was legal to be LGB in defence. And Kaz stepped forward. Now, the interesting thing there was women also couldn't serve in many frontline areas, including fast jet flying. And Kaz was a fast jet navigator. So in terms of outstripping everything that was accepted in her world, she literally stood up and said, okay, I need to do something different here. That really started things for us, and from there on in, things have trickled to change. And in that photo, if you look at the far left of the photo, that person is our most prominent out non-binary person. Now, the so what of that is, we've gone from literally left to right of arc in 20 years. And Secretary of State for Defence at the time, in the middle of that photo, marching with us at London Pride last year. So in terms of how far a loop we can go round, I think that's pretty expressive in its own right in one photo. And so I always start with the law changes. So for years, non-white people, and this is a long time ago, but non-white people, for example, couldn't parade outside Buckingham Palace for the Queen. Women were barred from all sorts of roles in terms of close quarter combat. And as I've said, yeah, it was actually illegal to be LGBT plus in defence up until 2000. I don't say that to shine a dark light on us. I say it to share with you, if we can come on this far in 20 years from that position, then everybody stands a chance of making a difference in this area, because we're not just talking about a cultural change, we were talking about actual defined law where people were dishonourably discharged for all sorts of things, and it barred them from active service. And so, yeah, what have we done about that? So, okay, yeah, the law did change, but law only changes so much, doesn't it? Because there is still the cultural and the behavioural stuff underneath. This is all pitched against 20 years of national and international change as well. And we're all sitting in the world we live in. This is a great example of, you know, innovation and difference. This is another version of that. And so we are mirroring society to a certain degree, and that's, we have to acknowledge we didn't do all of this on our own. Actually, the outside world changed with us. A good example of that was when they started doing some of the media stuff about celebrating 20 years of the law change this year. Actually, the media announcements that they reran of when it was first announced 20 years ago, they hadn't aged well at all. And I think it was a Channel 4 reporter said, even that hasn't aged well and feels awkward to display. So reeling back from that, it shows that actually society's changed, the culture's changed, and therefore we should be and are keeping up with that. There's been a real emphasis on internal and external engagement, because not everybody keeps up to date with what's going on in defence, understandably, and we do still do stands at certain prides, etc., and people say, hold on, I thought it was illegal. 20 years on, still that message needs to be shared and needs to be discussed. So that's important, but also people within our organisation. So my wife's actually a serving RAF nurse as well, and when she joined up much later in life than me, she had no idea it was ever illegal until I started talking about it. Now that's a real positive, because it shows how far we've come culturally, that's not extant in our day-to-day business, but it is important to recognise it, because there are still some people, both internally and externally, that feel quite passionate about this, understandably so. And I have to be honest that takes consistent effort. There's no way around it. And actually, these things come in and out of flavour depending on what we're trying to achieve at the time. Now's a great example, and we could be very easily distracted from doing anything in this space because everyone's focusing on the job at hand. And defence, there's no, at all times, we do have an integral part to defend our nation, and it would be very easy to get waylaid with that. But at this time, actually, it does take consistent effort, and we need to be aware of that. I've put monitoring on throughout this for different things. So the reason we got excited, if you like, about monitoring, because you've got to remember that we're coming from a position where some of this was illegal or certainly undervalued in any sort of capacity. So to go into a space where we were trying to monitor people's diversity sort of demographics, was a real challenge because so many people chose not to declare, quite understandably so. And we've had to do a lot of work in the education piece, the culture piece, in order to work out what it is we're trying to achieve by obtaining that data, and therefore what we'll do with it. And all of that is about encouraging people to be open, honest, and so we understand our own business and what we can do about it. And again, throughout all of this, understanding the mindset. Now, people talk about the defence mindset and, you know, soldier first, and we're here to defend the nation. In the diversity space, it's understanding that we've also inculcated a lot of culture and behaviour for the last 100 years. So in the initial switch between illegal and legal, there were still hordes and hordes of people whose whole career they'd been told this was wrong, and they were there to actively seek out, report, and get rid of us from open service. So you can't just overnight suddenly say, oh, the rules have changed and therefore all your own preconception and biases are now wrong. We had to work through that and try and do things to change those attitudes and to prove what we had to offer in this space. All pitched against, we are a bottom-fed organisation. So no one in defence just gets employed in a senior leadership role. We all start at the bottom and we all work up. So these things take time. If there's been 80 years of open barred service, you're not suddenly going to get someone in a senior leadership position, even if they are belonging to a different demographic, if they're not in a position to highlight that, or actually we've had to look at the people coming into our service and what they offer us in terms of different demographics. The important thing about that is it takes them time to get into a position of influence, which does make a difference in terms of change. It's been hard work. It takes people to actually stand up and be counted, and I think that's really important. What I really like is the example of my wife, and this is going back nearly 6 years ago. I presented at the anniversary of the 15-year anniversary, and she came to watch knowing that it was some big deal that Sarah was presenting at, and actually afterwards she said, I didn't even know that was a thing. And she'd been in the service a few years by that point. I absolutely think we should be celebrating that as a success, because if we've got to that position, that's a really positive step, and I do feel that that's true. And to this year, to get to the stage where all roles open to women, and I get the complexities around active military service and the differences in genders and what that means socially. There is some uncomfortable conversations to be had there, but I'm not going to apply to be a proper soldier. I'm comfortable being a nurse, but some people want to do it and they can do it and they can do it well, and therefore we should be making sure those opportunities are around. So, okay, so that's the diversity bit. And yes, we started from a point of legal standing and we have come a reasonable amount in 20 years. But that only goes so far. So the law's changed, but if inclusion is what we do, well, the question is, what did we do? So yes, following on from that, there was clearly some internal policy changes that needed to be worked through. The problem with that is all our policymakers were predominantly straight white men. So that flashes up some immediate concerns. So that's where I really came to the party pretty early on and helped form the employee network groups. Now, most of you know what employee network groups are. I don't need to tell you about that. But what we used them for really was a smart customer approach. So it wasn't necessarily about, in the early stages, about making support networks, about making social networks. This was about people with that lived experience to feed information to our senior leadership and to our policymakers to say, yeah, okay, that's the bottom line, but how does this really work? What do you really need to say in order to change culture and change behaviours? How does that actually matter to me? And that was really quite powerful. And there was literally, all gloves are off. Anything that we thought we could influence, we had the open door to do it. And that's right up to, like I showed you the photo previously of Kaz Page. She basically wrote what can defence do to support someone transitioning in service, which was huge, bearing in mind we're told where to live, where to sleep, what to wear. All of those micro things that make up a person's being, actually a lot of those decisions are made for us in defence. So we had to gloves off and start again. But we're now on something like version 5 of that, which shows how far we've been able to come and the big differences we've been able to make. Rather than just it all be about one person, we've been able to say, this is bigger than that. This is a whole defence situation that we can do better in. Going back to some of those themes, external and internal engagement, it didn't go away. We didn't suddenly just say, okay, we've got a team sat in a corner doing some advice. No, this was much bigger than that. And we used a lot of opportunity to cross-contaminate, if you like, with our other services. Other government organisations also doing a lot of learning in this space, but also internally, we had to work hard, there's no doubt about it, to start looking at that mindset, to start looking at what we offered, and to start demonstrating that this was going to be good for our business. And it wasn't just a political decision, this was about our people. Clearly taking consistent effort. And I've added monitoring in here. Okay, so once we've got past the people monitoring each other's demographics, the so what about that is, how is it actually affecting our business? And so we very quickly went into not just monitoring who people are, but also how they feel about that. And we do quite a lot of internal engagement monitoring and sort of behaviour studies, sort of the lived experience. And so there's both a families and the serving people's attitude study that goes out every year, and we were able to influence that quite early on to see, as we changed some of the higher level policy and some of the strategic direction, what effect did that have at the tactical level. Clearly that's been a learning curve. And we didn't get it right all the time, but we have been able to say, yeah, okay, this has made a difference, or no, actually it hasn't, don't waste our effort in there any further, because there's better things we can work with. Going back to that, understanding the mindset. So yeah, just because you've changed policy doesn't mean to say you've changed your people. Most people join defence and stay within our organisation for upwards 9 to 35 years. So nothing happens overnight in terms of changing people's behaviour and understanding, and that's where we've had to say, okay, what are the blockers, who are the blockers, where do they sit, and what can we do about that? Where can we actually focus influence, training, education, support for some? Actually, this is just about helping people get through that scenario. Using those smart customers in the employee network groups to feed back in a formal and informal way in order to make that shift has been really useful, because we are a global network. Essentially, we have pockets of people all over the place that will all have their own subculture. We had to accept that quite early on and work out how we regionalise some of this in order to make consistent change as well. And then bottom fed organisation. So because I'm now working in the training or leading the training environment for defence, there's a consistent story that because we're a bottom fed organisation, because things have changed so much outside, that we'll recruit people that think differently, that get all of this, and that it'll just naturally change. That's great, except we then spend weeks and months trying to make people think like us so that they behave like soldiers, sailors and airwomen. But that's great, because they're being taught by people that have thought like me for 20 years. So actually we have to really guard against it's just going to change because we're recruiting young, fresh, new people. Actually, this is where consistent effort, consistent asking the uncomfortable conversations, and us applying our stuff to their ideas, and that's where we're having to sort of change the dynamic, because it's not a natural flow of information and culture change, and we need to think about that. Moving on a bit, so yeah, and this is where it matters. So people join defence to potentially put themselves in harm's way. You can't get around that. That is what we do for business. We have to make people feel included and like they're part of our defence family, and that's part of our culture, that's part of our ethos, and we're really proud. A lot of the things we do about building culture and ethos are in order to give people that spirit of, I can do this when it really matters, and we have to accept that. And diversity inclusion is another form of that. It's just changed over time. So what have we done to make people feel like they are part of our family? What is it that we're cultivating in order to actually drive that change? And then, so I thought I'd use this photo. So this photo was taken earlier on this year in Houses of Parliament, and this is us celebrating the 20-year anniversary of lifting the ban. Now, I'll try and show you through. So the gentleman wearing the gold in the middle that's like laughing, that's Chief of the Air Staff, so he's the most senior person in the Air Force. To his right is Kaz Page, who I've already talked about. There's a gentleman in civilian clothing, I don't know if you can see him slightly to the right in that photo. So he's the ex-mayor of Manchester. He was in the Air Force for a good few years and was actually dishonourably discharged before the law changed. But he feels so strongly about his connection with the Air Force. He's still supported us through this time in order to drive positive change, and he's still very connected. And yeah, I am down the bottom there on the left. The reason I've shown that is because look at people's faces. Look how happy they are to be celebrating that event. They actually are part of it. They care about it. And in fact, that's wrong. About 80% of the people in that photo would not be allowed to legally serve if this hadn't have happened. And that's really quite powerful, because you can see some of the ribbons and some of the battle honours that those people have got. They have served their country, and that does really matter. So I bring that up because we need to celebrate success. We need to be quite open about where we have made changes and where people are succeeding in our organisation. I often use the phrase, you cannot be what you cannot see. I think most of you will have heard that at some point in talking about some of this stuff. And I say it on purpose. Yes, sometimes it can be a bit clunky, it can be a bit intentional, but we have to demonstrate that some things are possible, like the media splash about LAC Sandover, who the photo I started at the start with, because without sharing that, people still might not know that that's even possible. And we know when someone ran a 5-minute mile for the first time, suddenly it was achievable, and then other people did it. This is the same thing, because if we can do it from a point of illegality, then really anybody should be able to do this. It's absolute fact. Yes, it takes consistent effort. It's easy to take our eye off the ball, but actually we're just getting better. Monitoring. So monitoring now isn't about who we've got and what we've got, it's what they bring to the party. So how far in our organisation are they going now? We're at the stage of looking, okay, of that 9 to 35-year career path, where do they now drop out and why? What can we do about those individual demographics to try and encourage them to stay longer and achieve more in our organisation? And that's a consistent learning curve that we're really trying to map out. We haven't got it all right. We know that still, for whatever reason, defence isn't always an attractive career choice for people of different ethnicities. And we're trying to work out why. Work out where we can influence that and what we need to do in order to answer some of those questions, if at all we can. We can't change our business, but we can change our culture, and that's really, really important. Again, bottom-fed organisation. Yeah, we can't get away from that, but we can celebrate when people are doing well. It's taken some time, 35 years to get to the level of starred officer that we can see in the centre of that photo. Our organisation will always be run by someone that's a pilot. That's because we need them to understand the complexity of air warfare, and we need them to hold the risk for how that sort of plays out in the reality of it. Well, if 20 years ago women couldn't serve as a fast jet pilot, it's not a surprise that we haven't got Chief of the Air Staff that's female, but that will change, and actually we are looking at the ways to make that happen with more support and better, to the best of our ability. And now just one before that, so understanding the rationale I've put in there rather than understanding the mindset, and that's intentional. So interestingly, we were talking about this all about people and trying to recruit people and trying to keep them, and what we're doing for our individuals. We now switch to, how does this impact the business? We're using a lot of external research. It's becoming quite widely talked about in, where does this add value to our output? And the conversation has changed in the relatively short period of time, it has to be said, But yeah, we're now looking at our leadership conferences being around this subject, not because it's flavour of the month, but because we need our leaders to get the very best out of our people. Defence, like every other organisation at the minute, is pinching on our people, on our finances, and what we need to deliver. And therefore, we're being more and more interested in that bottom line and the business effect to this. And I think that's worth accepting, in terms of it's not just about the moral reasons, some of it's about the business reasons, though clearly, you know, I've come at it from very much from the moral reasons. So in all of that, so I'd left it with, if you and your organisations think you've done everything you can, or you're working hard to sort out diversity, if you already have diversity, and some of you will be much more diverse than we are, there's no doubt about that, and you're nailing some of the inclusivity pieces because of understanding the rationale for that, I was going to leave it with you to try and work out, what are you doing about cultivating that sense of belonging? What are you doing about making a family in order to develop some of this? And that was really going to be my closing statement.
And I'm sure it's been absolutely fascinating for everyone, and especially myself, learning how far the forces has actually come over what has been a number of decades. So thanks so much for being a great role model, Sarah, and hopefully things keep pushing on.
Fine lines and wrinkles? I want to combat the signs of aging.
Strong, healthy hair. What's my secret?
With my busy life, I don't have time to slow down.
I can't believe we turned up wearing the same thing.
I want a lip gloss that can stay on whatever life throws at me.
All-day protection, now with wings, so I can handle anything.
Women should be defined by actions, not cliches. Every role in the RAF is open to everyone, from spare time to the front line.